incredible names there and incredible achievers as well. So in our panel, we're going to discuss just what mental health means, how poor mental health manifests, and how it affects performance, and then how best we can manage minds to ensure that we're working with healthy human beings, and also what the barriers are to doing that. And we've got 5 expert panellists, some of whom have got very personal stories to tell as well. The first is the former CEO of the British Athletes Commission, Ian Bray. Now, Ian's now set up Duty of Care in Action, which provides an advisory service to national governing bodies, member associations and higher education institutions on all aspects of duty of care. So please welcome Ian. We also have a barrister to join us. Geoffrey Bacon is from Ely Place Chambers, sponsors of this session, and he's got a wealth of experience having been engaged by elite Olympic coaches, plus advising on disputes and drafting employment agreements across an array of sports. So, Geoff Bacon. Shamima Yusuf is a psychologist specialising in sports psychology and athlete well-being, and amongst other roles, she's currently a psychologist at Brighton and Hove Albion Football Club. Please welcome Shamima. And from the Rugby Players Association, we have Rugby Director Richard Bryan. Now, Richard's responsible for the RPA's player welfare programmes. He used to play for Bath, Newport and Leeds, but retired due to injury, then qualified as a solicitor. So he advised the RPA on legal issues before then joining them in 2011. Please welcome Richard Bryan. And finally, we're joined by an Olympic hockey gold medalist.
International hockey player and Olympic gold and bronze medalist. Hockey was one of those ones where, it was the team aspect of it that I really loved. Oh my God, it was incredible. To beat the Dutch full stop is something pretty tough, but to beat them 3-all and then go to the shootout and then finish on a win was just incredible.
That brings back a few memories. I was certainly privileged to be there on that day in Rio. Please welcome Olympic champion Helen Richardson-Walsh. Thank you all very much for being here today. It's great to see you all. I sort of outlined, I guess, where we'll go during this session. It's probably a good idea, Shamima, if we maybe start with you, just to get a bit of a broader overview on what we are talking about when we talk about mental health.
Yeah, so I'd say mental health is a certain level of psychological well-being. And it's interesting when we hear the words mental health, we immediately go to the negative connotation and the mental illness side. But actually it's about having a certain level of psychological well-being. What we mean by that is emotional and behavioural well-being, or an absence of mental illness. And when we think about mental illnesses, we might think about anxiety disorders, we might think about depression. With athletes, it could also be eating disorders, you might have substance abuse, so a range of different illnesses there.
Helen, if I could come to you then, tell us your story, because you've been on your very own personal journey through hockey.
Yeah, so I was someone who grew up in sport, and sport was everything to me, and I played hockey from a very young age. I got into the international team when I was 17. I went to the Olympics when I was 18. It was all very much a nice straight line in my journey in terms of getting into squads and things like that. And I struggled in particular when I suffered it from injury, because my identity was very much embroiled in being a hockey player, being a sportswoman. When that was taken away from me, that's when I particularly struggled. I think being part of a sports team is is a very unique thing, and when you're part of something, particularly for the London Olympics and the Rio Olympic Games, you know, I was part of a team that was incredibly special, and we created something that was just amazing, and the bonds that we had were incredible. And so when I wasn't a part of that, or I was in the squad but kind of wasn't because I was injured, that sense of belonging was not really there, and that was very difficult to deal with.
Is it possible to say how that sense of manifests itself within you, sort of physical signs, symptoms even?
So yeah, I mean, I guess I knew there was a problem when I couldn't stop crying. If I'm honest, I think that was when I started to think, hold on, this is something more than just being a bit down. I just couldn't stop crying, and fortunately I had a doctor who was very supportive.
Just through hockey?
Through hockey, yeah, so a hockey doctor. And I think I actually went to see him for something else, completely separate, and he must have asked me whether I was okay, and it kind of must have all come out. And he was very supportive, and that was kind of the first time that I started, you know, I actually remember him saying, I think you may have depression. And actually, instead of being scared by that word, I was a little bit relieved. I was like, oh, okay, there's a name for this. Like, I'm not just some crazy woman, like you can't control anything. There's actually a name for this. So actually I was relieved by that word rather than scared by it.
That almost gave you a sense that actually there is something tangible here and therefore I can take control.
Yeah, and do something about it. Yeah, definitely.
Or did you have any fears about your hockey community knowing about this?
Yeah, I would think so. There's definitely a sense of that stigma that is attached to it, of that feeling of, you know, looking like you're not able to cope and that you're weak, the things that you don't want to be associated with as a sports person. And certainly in my position in the leadership group within the squad, an experienced player, you know, whether the coach would think, should you be in that position? So they were certainly things that went through my mind. In reality, I don't think I had any, well, I didn't have any backlash from talking about it. But you can't stop what goes through your mind. That's probably part of it.
We'll come back to you in a moment. I want to come to Ian as well, because you set up Duty of Care in Action Sport. You worked with athletes before that. You have also had your own experiences of poor mental health.
Yeah, about a year ago now, two things happened to me. One was I was away for the weekend with my son, and we had full-on Friday. We were in Lisbon, full-on day. We did Lisbon that way, then the Saturday we did Lisbon that way. And I woke up on the Sunday morning and we had nothing arranged to do. And I had a panic attack. There's nothing in my diary. And Harry said to me, do you think you're working too hard, Dad? Which was a great question. And I had to think about it. My answer to him was, I don't know how to relax anymore. And a week later, a soft-coated Irish Wheaton Terrier turned up in our house, and the Braid family had been campaigning for a dog for bloody ages, and clearly I was in a weak moment, right? So I'd given in. But anyway, so this dog turned up, and the house was joyous, and it was giddy. And I'm looking at, he's called Fred. I'm looking at Fred, and he's looking at me, and he's going, I don't know who the big fella is, but he looks wrong. And I was looking at Fred going, I've got chaos in my head, I've got chaos every time I go out the door because I was in the middle of being in the, leading the BAC in some very big investigations. So I'm thinking the only place I've got stability is in Chateau Braid, and you, mate, have just rocked up and you've just ruined all of that. And I didn't know how to deal with this little puppy. So I went to the doctors. And a bit like Helen said, once I'd realised there was something wrong, and I was signed off immediately, because it was all situational, my illness, because of what my psychotherapist said to me was 4.5 years of vicarious trauma. You get a form to fill in, I'm sure Helen had to do it as well, the General Anxiety Disorder Questionnaire. I scored 21 out of 22. I had a personal health questionnaire, which if you scored 27 out of 27, you probably wouldn't be around to fill the questionnaire, right? But I scored 22 out of 27. So I knew I'd got a problem. And it was, I dealt with, I used to tell myself that when an athlete came to me and said, Ian, I haven't been picked for the Commonwealths or the Olympics or Paralympics, I always used to try and tell myself that that wasn't my problem, that was the athlete's problem, but I would try and help them as much as I could. And I used to think that I left that upstairs, because the BAC is a virtual organisation, so when I wasn't dealing with what I had to deal with, I was thinking about where I was going to find the next one to go, right? So I had no detachment in the house. The Olympics, Rio Olympics, there were lots of people, lots of athletes came, because the BAC was known then, so I was dealing with all of that. I then had to work with Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson on duty of care, and then October 2016, my phone didn't stop ringing, and it was 2 groups of athletes in 2 sports, all making the same allegations independently. And that was then like a sort of class action. So I had all of that to deal with before Tanni's report was published, and that was about how the BAC was being perceived. It wasn't just the athlete's problem, this was, if I make a mess of this, then the BAC life would be hell. So it just built up.
I think it's important that we've got both you and Helen here today, because whilst every sports organisation, the very public face of it, are the athletes, it's like a pyramid, isn't it? And there is a whole raft of people within that organisation, whether it's the chief executives at the top of it and other support staff. And for you in particular, who cares for the carers?
It was interesting, because I was signed off for a month, right? June. And I went back and I spoke to coaches, PDs, CEOs, and they were all like, where have you been? Because I hadn't been on their case for a month. And I told them, because I had no problem with talking about the fact that I was suffering from anxiety, stress and depression. And I promise you, they all said, I know 3 people like you, or I know 6 pints a night isn't a great thing, but that's how I cope, or I know exactly how you're feeling because I'm on 350 milligrams or something. So it is. It's the pressure of I think in a way there's a lot of pressure on athletes, clearly, but the crux of it, I think, is the people under pressure in the funding model.
Richard, if I could come to you, you helped set up the Lift the Weights campaign with the RPA. Tell us a little bit about that, why or how you discovered it was necessary and what it does exactly.
Well, the Lift the Weight campaign, we launched it in February 2017, and we have over 750 members amongst the Aviva Premiership, the England senior team, men and women's, and England Sevens. And we provide all kinds of manner of support services to those players. So we have people on the ground who are helping them with their personal development and welfare, our team of personal development managers. We also have a confidential counselling service, which is funded entirely by our charity, Restart Rugby. And so we're very much on the ground, helping players, assisting them, as best we can. We were doing a lot around awareness raising of mental health issues in sport and in rugby. But we were looking at really a lot of work that other sports did as well. And there was some great work being done by other player associations, Professional Cricket Association, Professional Football Association, and actually Player Association in Ireland as well. And we just thought there was something missing in rugby union at that time around, this might sound quite grand in terms of what we're trying to achieve, but trying to break down some of the stigma, some of the barriers, and raise awareness of where players could actually go and get support, whether that was via us or other forms of support that were out there. And we didn't really have a campaign. And really, we also looked around, and it was quite interesting. I think when I became a trainee solicitor, I always remember being told one of the scariest things of being a lawyer to have a blank piece of paper. And we had a blank piece of paper, thinking, right, how are we going to get to that? How are we going to get to that end of normalising the conversation around mental health amongst rugby and rugby union? Because rugby union, there's obviously an element of toughness and perception of not just physical toughness, but you have to be mentally tough too. And there's a mix-up between that and mental health. And we realised the scale of the problem of what we were seeing coming through the confidential counselling service, but we thought the numbers we're probably around 25 to 30 players, retired and current, to 450 retired members as well, coming into that system. We thought that there's more here, there should be more coming through to us. And so we decided we were going to put this awareness campaign together. And really, we only really had Duncan Bell previously, who was an England international in 2012, very bravely sort of spoke about, and I'm not sure you should be speaking about being bravely to speak about these issues, but he was, because there were no other professional rugby players at the time in England talking about mental health issues. And he spoke about his 10-year battle with depression. And we'd seen a spike in referrals to the confidential counselling service, and then it kind of died down again. And so we wanted to then put a campaign on that was really going to, really try and strike at the heart of the issues we saw, something that wasn't being talked about, and give people the confidence to talk about, not necessarily publicly, but knowing that they could go and get support, and it was okay to ask for help as well. And but our biggest problem was we actually, once we had our plan on what we were going to do, and the campaign was really successful, but it was trying to find the players to speak about it. And we had to go to our people on the ground, our personal event managers, who we think might be, perhaps has struggled or has experience of other people struggling, and would be willing to talk about it. And we found 9 players, some very high-profile names, as you saw in the video, James Haskell, John Wilson, and some players, elite-level players, perhaps not so household names, but spoken very openly about their struggles. And the big message we realised is that the players listen to other players. And if we could crack that, we could really open our services. And we brought the campaign together. We released it over social media, over media platforms, and had a really, really good response. And our number of referrals to the counselling service did go up significantly. So we're looking, it was nearly around 60 last year. We're probably on course to do the same this year. And now it's incumbent on us to try and keep those messages going, and to keep talking around the subject within what is a really kind of intense area of professional rugby union. That's our challenge.
The idea of confidential helplines and counsellor helplines can be tricky though, can't it? And I've had conversations with the PCA about this, where as if you have a flood of calls, you can see very clearly that the helpline is doing something. But actually, in a sense, you sort of don't want that many calls, because the indication is that that's a lot of people who are requiring help. But is it about requiring help, or in fact, should we be encouraging athletes to simply be using these services as an ongoing part of their, as Shamini was saying, mental health, not because they've got a problem that needs fixing? Yeah,
absolutely. It's not just, we want to be able to address issues before they come to that point, almost. We've had members talk very publicly about where they've been right at the extreme end and the help they've needed. And we want to be able to say, address those issues before they get to that point. And so part of it, it's not just around the counselling service. we actively go into the clubs to talk to players around different areas as we see the whole sort of mental health spectrum. So, for instance, this year we focused on alcohol awareness. Season before was gambling awareness, and also mental health and resilience. So, trying to enable players through education to understand those issues, and not just in themselves, but I think equally importantly going forward is in their teammates, and so they can see the problems amongst their teams. It's such an intense unit of professional rugby teams, as in many other sports, that you need people on the ground to be able to recognise, help, assist, signpost players in the right direction for help. Because there's one thing, I guess, about talking and seeking help. We also want it to be the right help. But you're right, I see your point around it. You're great, you've got more numbers coming to the confidential counselling service. If I was to say that suggests that there's more problems out there. But so yeah, I understand what you're saying, but it is important that those players are seeking help. It doesn't have to be through us. It helps that we're independent, and that's confidential. It might be through the club doctor. It might be whatever the source of help needs to be. But sometimes that can be one of the barriers as well. Is a player perhaps going to someone in their club who's attached to their employer? Well, is this confidential? Can I speak to this person? So we want to try and break down those barriers as much as possible.
You've raised more questions I want to come back to, particularly regarding education, regarding language as well, so I hope I will remember those. Jeffrey, this seems like a good point to bring you in. Confidentiality issues, but first of all, just simply on the duty of care that a governing body, an employer has towards, I guess, firstly athletes and also the staff that they have around them as regards mental health.
Well, I think if we start with the fact that a number of reports, including, for example, last year's Mind report, identified that elite athletes are particularly susceptible to stress and anxiety. It's an important starting point because the simple ingredients of a claim in tort start off with whether there's a duty of care owed, and there's a very simple test. The first of those is whether or not any damage is foreseeable. And effectively all of these reports are saying that there is a risk of harm from the environment that sportsmen work in. So there is certainly a good possibility in my view that there is a foreseeability of mental health damage being caused to athletes if they're not treated properly. The second is the extent to which there's a relationship with proximity. Is the person to whom I'm being told I owe a duty of care someone who is so closely and directly affected by my acts that I ought to have them in my contemplation when I act? Well, there is a whole team of people working around these elite athletes, and there are a whole series of duties which might be owed by a governing body, by an individual club, potentially by the coaches within that club, although they will be, the employer will normally be vicariously liable for their acts. But there's there's proximity very clearly. And then the third ingredient is whether or not it's fair, just and reasonable to impose a duty of care, which effectively gives the court the opportunity to stop certain types of duties being owed if that will open the floodgates to so many claims that it's just simply not fair or not right in society to provide that duty. But a duty of care is is only the starting point, because first you've got to establish, is there a duty? You don't have a claim in tort or in contract unless you suffer loss. And generally speaking, the notion of recovery damages for just general stress and anxiety is very, very limited. So in terms of what ultimate liabilities there might be, that may provide a limitation. And you've also got to establish that there's a cause between the breach of the duty that you owe and the loss that's been suffered. So if we take an example of a couple of the cases we've heard about today, Helen's situation, I don't know the fact, but part of what she went through was the depression and anxiety caused by being injured and not being part of the team. That would have presumably had some role in what led to her suffering from what she suffered. Well, that's not necessarily arising from a breach of duty of care, it arises from the fact that she became injured. You take Ian Position on the other hand, he's dealing with extremely stressful caseload, and we hear about people working in social work or other fields like that. It's a very, very stressful thing to do, and he is being potentially bombarded from all directions from a whole series of people who all want his time. And there, it sounds as if it's actually purely the pressure of work which will have caused him to have the symptoms which he suffered. So, and I certainly for my part, my experience in the last couple of years or so has mainly been acting for coaches, coaches of Olympic sports, head coaches of Olympic sports who have been suspended on the grounds of safeguarding, which is obviously a very, very serious issue. But I've had some experiences where there has been what we call in employment law a knee-jerk suspension. In other words, as soon as an allegation is made, you don't look into that allegation at all, you just suspend the person. And that is that does, to my mind, pose a potential of serious risk of liability, because what happened in some of my cases was they were immediately suspended. They then invited lots of people to come forward. All kinds of people came forward. They wouldn't tell us what the allegations were. We didn't know what the allegations were for about 2 months, and this poor person was sat, not able to go to work, not able to contact anybody. And I had 2 or 3 occasions of people sobbing in my chamber, just saying, I can't cope anymore, I just want to walk away. And they didn't seem to have anywhere to go. So yes, there is clearly, because of the fact that we've now highlighted through so many cases of people coming out and saying, yes, I have suffered from stress and anxiety, we're clearly aware there's foreseeability. There's clearly a very close relationship. And so, yes, it's something we've got to take very seriously.
So that sort of duty of care in relation to perhaps maybe what the cause of mental health problems may be. What about a simple obligation to provide support services and
Well, I think that's very important. There's only so much you can do, but I think what we've got to try to get to is a situation where sport tries to do something to prevent these things from happening, rather than just waiting for someone to come and complain, which I think has been what has happened in the past. Well, okay, there's a counselling service over there, or we put some person in an office over there who you can phone. Well, that's all very well, but it's actually quite difficult.
So Helen,
it's very difficult to pick the phone up, I think, sometimes. Yeah. And to make, I think Helen said she came out to her doctor when she was talking about something else. It just actually all came out. So maybe a mechanism needs to be put into place which can try to identify what stress or identification symbols there are, as well as just simply sitting and waiting and saying, well, there's a service there if you get unwell.
What education, Helen, did you have, or knowledge did you have about your own mental health, the way the mind works, or indeed what support there was before any of this became apparent to you?
Well, so I've obviously kind of struggled, quite a long period of time in my career. So I've seen the late 90s and now where we're moving to, and kind of just the whole area of psychology in sport has changed dramatically in that time. You know, when I went to Sydney in 2000, I remember there being a psychologist, not with our team, but just with Team GB, and we were just like looking over, like, who is this person? Why are they around our team? What are they doing? Like, what are they listening to? What are they, you know? And to now the point where we have a psychologist who is fully integrated, who not only works with us as individuals, but works on our team culture, and actually one of the things we did with our psychologists for the London Cycle and for Rio was really try to understand ourselves as individuals. So our self-awareness, my self-awareness has increased drastically over the last 6 to 8 years or so. Looking at things like what you like on a good day and a bad day, how you get yourselves to either of those places, and if you're on a bad day, how do you get out of that? Looking at super strengths, things like that.
What's a super strength?
What's a super? Well,
what's your super strength?
Well, one of my super strengths is, in hockey terms, is that my basic skills are exceptional under fatigue and pressure. So, and actually, I don't know if it is a British thing, but I think we struggle to say what we're good at in general. And that was something that we found in our team. We struggled to say it. We struggled to even say it to ourselves, let alone our teammates, and let alone out loud and in a conference like this. But me knowing that super strength helped me in the most pressured environment of taking that penalty stroke in the Olympic final. That is pressure. I'm fatigued, 8 matches in 14 days. And it's a basic skill from the spot to the goal.
And that's a really important causality then, isn't it? So your mental health management, your good mental health, and the tools that you had learned led you to understand pressure, understand yourself, be able to convert, win that medal. Because often, I suppose, governing bodies will look and think, well, it's all very well putting lots of resources into mental health, but it's quite difficult to measure how that is actually helping our end cause, which for many people is winning.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I mean, Jeff's talking is kind of insinuating that there's always a problem, but actually there's not. You know, there are people who get selected for everything, have never been injured, and they still have mental health issues. They still struggle with their well-being. And so for me, I've probably thought over about the last 10 years, I've probably thought we need more. We need to talk about this right from the start. As soon as a young player comes into the squad, it's just part and parcel of what we talk about. You know, you get physically screened. Why aren't, you know, you should be mentally screened, you should have your health and well-being checked at the start, and then it's part of your day-to-day, it's part of the language. I know you're going to come back to that, but we only really started to talk about mental health and well-being literally in about the last year or so that I was in the team. So it is very new, but the more we talk about it, the more it is just, you know, the coach saying it. I think that plays a massive role. The power of the coach for an athlete is huge.
Is it just the coach, Ian, or is it in the context of an organisation, actually the culture of the entire organisation, not just those who are on the sports field?
Well, I think it's the culture of the entire organisation. Helen has been involved in a campaign, Not a Red Card, which is sponsored by Legal & General. And the report that published last year said that it was great that there were athletes in sport speaking out, like Helen does so eloquently, Michael Jameson, who was here last year. What it did say was there were not enough, quotes, leaders in sport also talking about mental health. And in a way, it's one of the things that's driving me now. And, you know, if I talk to an audience and 200 people think I'm rubbish, but one person says, thank you, I've realised I've got an issue, then that's a successful day out. And that's, you know, it's a very, well, it's a demanding environment, but that's just the same for the legal profession and so on and so forth. It's a slow burn to change the culture, and then the culture in the organisation, and then the culture in the squads.
Yeah, you can't expect athletes to start being open about it if people at the top aren't open about it.
Which is why it's an opportunity now, I think, because there are a number of very high-profile people that have spoken out across a number of sports. And I think maybe that may begin to break that stigma down. It's a time to say, actually, it's not so scary to do it. Look, they did it, and this person did it. And there are some very big names out there, and that, I think, perhaps gives an opportunity to break that stigma.
One of the issues that I found when I was doing these big investigations, there were 2 or 3 athletes who, in my view, very bravely stayed on the programme so that they would then make these allegations, and of course they all had a consequence on their mental health, because it was too easy for people to say, well, X is only speaking out because he or she is now retired, and they're, you know, bitter and twisted or you know, resentful or whatever. So these athletes staying on the programme, taking, in their view, a huge risk and putting a lot of faith and trust in me, which was humbling, but was very, you know, I didn't feel it at the time because I'm like that, but hugely stressful. So for them to stay on the programme and talk about mental health and make allegations about sexual harassment and bullying and intimidation and da-da-da, that was also a bit of a game changer. But it took me weeks, in many cases, to get the athletes to agree that it wasn't just talking to me, but I needed to do something. not only on their behalf, but on behalf of the other athletes in the squad that hadn't been affected, and the next generation. So that was a big conundrum in my head, which caused sleepless nights, because the athletes are, it's high performance sport. Mental health stigma, can't see it. Helen's on crutches, we can see she's broken her leg. Broken her mind, you can't see it. Worry about speaking out, because the athletes aren't employed, but they sign which is a test case I think Jess Varnish is still trying to come to a conclusion with. But they sign funding agreements, and the funding agreements they don't really understand, but there are clauses in there that say if you speak out against your sport or sports, then you run the risk of losing your funding. So where the hell do you go with all that lot?
Well, from the legal point of view then as well, yeah, and rugby as well. Perhaps, come start with the rugby and then we'll go to the legal point.
I was just interested in a couple of things that Ian said there around particularly not being able to see mental health issues, and that's quite a big issue. But a similar issue with concussion, because sometimes it's the injury that you can't see. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but rugby in particular is around concussion. All the stakeholders, players, coaches really grasp that from an awareness point of view and understanding that you might not be on crutches, but you're still injured, you're potentially serious injured. I think mental health still has some way to go in that respect in our sport. But I think what's also interesting is, and I've thought about this quite a lot as well, in terms of what makes a professional sports man or woman or rugby player any different from the stresses and strains that come in other professions, lawyers, medics, whatever your profession, there are stresses and strains with it. And so we see our top three presenting problems that come through the counselling service are depression, adjustment disorder, so coping with long-term injury, retirement, and anxiety and stress. But you think you sort of dip into that further and what the kind of things we're seeing. I think there's a lot of work that's been understanding those stresses and strains that athletes go through. And so we come across financial concerns, we come across obviously contractual uncertainty. Rugby players sign 1, 2 or 3 year fixed term contract if you're lucky. But I remember the interview question I hate more than ever is where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Because as a former professional rugby player, I concentrated on 1 year at a time if I was lucky. I had a club that disappeared overnight. In fact, Richard Parks was my teammate in that club that disappeared overnight, and Richard Harry was our legal representative. So we remember that very well. You've got injury concerns, you've got all these things that are part of being a professional sportsmen and women, which perhaps aren't in other professions, but particularly as well, seeing it more than ever, is the performance aspect, the pressure on you to perform week in, week out. And if you look recently, perhaps at the England rugby team, and performance at the Six Nations didn't go according to plan. But if you look at some of the reactions to that, these are players who are under scrutiny week in, week out. They're performing in front of thousands of people, millions of people as a TV audience. Then there's the social media pressures. Their performances are dissected, week on week. And they went from, in a matter of weeks, of being world beaters to, and then you looked at, they've lost a few games, and suddenly everything's completely changed.
Very exposed.
Completely. And you think of the pressures that adds onto athletes, let alone an Olympic gold medal match. So those are the real issues, and we're actually undertaking some work at the moment with the RFU and Premiership Rugby, because there's a lot of talk in rugby around match load and training load, but there's very little in ways of research around psychological load, and actually what are the stresses on professional rugby players. And that's some research we're undertaking at the moment over a 2-year project to really try and understand those issues, and allows us in the sport to then hopefully address some of those issues. But those are kind of that understanding of actually what professional athletes go through is actually fundamental.
Which means there is that performance expectation and pressure, but also what Richard's alluding to there, the simple fact of these are human beings who have families, mortgages to pay, rent to pay, food to buy, and if there is anything which might threaten their security, they face exactly the same day-to-day pressures as any other person in the streets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with any athlete that sits in front of me, I'm not starting off with the performance narrative and dialogue. I want to know who is the person that's sitting in front of me, what's going on in their lives, who are their support system, what are their experiences, and that might bring up that they've had experience with mental health, have they ever been injured, and to really build a picture of who they are as a person, and also how they identify, because they don't only identify as an athlete. A lot of these individuals have intersecting identities, whether race, ethnicity, religion, and to validate who they are as a person. And then we can start to see where perhaps they may be struggling in certain aspects of their performance. To go back to what Ian said, I think there is an organisational responsibility there. And there is a culture that we need to start building up and sort of saying that, we need these certain individuals within the organisation. We need to build that trust within an organisation so the athletes themselves feel that they can come forward and talk about these things openly. I know where I am at Brighton Hove Albion Football Club, we work very much as a multidisciplinary team. The physios, the medics, the coaches, myself. Of course, there are confidentiality aspects. If a player comes to speak to me about detailed aspects, I have to be very careful with how I'm taking that information, always making sure that if I need to share some of that information, then the consent is given. If it isn't, I respect that. But at the same time, I can share themes, and we talk about that. We make sure that we talk about that beforehand. I talk about that with the athlete. So there is that organisational, I think, responsibility there. Coming back to you, Helen, I think the education piece and the narrative is so important. You alluded, Richard, to talking about toughness. I, for a long time, have been saying and championing for us to get away from this word and this phrase that has been coined, mental toughness, and there's a lot of research out there about it. But what are you saying to athletes when you use the word toughness? Toughness is being rigid, and actually, no, we need to be agile. To know that we have emotions which make us very human, and there's no such thing as negative and positive as far as I'm concerned when it comes to emotions. Anger can be a very positive emotion if we take the time to choose how we want to respond in that moment.
We heard from Richard Parkton that his fear became his greatest asset in that sense.
And it's very important, I think, to understand that issues of stress and anxiety don't only arise in the workplace or only in the capacity of being a sportsman. I think what we're saying, everyone's a human being. And I think it's very important, as Helen is saying, when people are brought into these elite sports, that people understand who they are, not just about their goals or their aims as a sports person, because of course they're passionate about that, that's their life, but actually to understand there could be things completely outside of their sport, in their family and all kinds of other aspects of their life. So that, I think, is important. And I think it's also very important for sport to synergise their approach to this as much as they possibly can, because simply looking at it from a legal perspective, if you imagine one very well-funded sport that's got this fantastic team around them that looks at the whole issue of mental health very carefully, and another sport which just because of funding doesn't have that, it makes it a little bit easy for someone from the other sport to say, well, they get it, they provide that service to me, so why don't I get it? So I think it's very important to get a cross-sport approach.
We have got some roving microphones, by the way, and it would be interesting perhaps to throw out to the audience, not right now, I'll give you a few moments to think maybe, but if I'm interested to hear whether, perhaps from a governing body perspective, maybe what barriers there may be or what considerations there are for a governing body when it comes to putting those mental health support networks in place. Is it sort of weighing up the competing interests of funding and simply where to allocate your funding? Are there other barriers that would be relevant to bring up here for us to talk about and discuss. So perhaps in a few moments I might come back to the audience, and if no one wants to say anything, that's fine, but if you do, it's an opportunity then to just join in the debate as well. You've touched on the idea of language, so we'll just come to that now, mental toughness. We've mentioned stigma as well. I just want to read a couple of lines from a couple of online pieces which I came across the other day. This is an online article regarding the England wicketkeeper batter Sarah Taylor, who's had a year out of the game after struggling with anxiety. And this said, speaking to the BBC, Taylor conceded that she was undergoing cognitive behavioural therapy. Another article, Robbie Savage has lifted the lid on his mental health issues, admitting he has suffered from anxiety. Now, there are two words which stood out to me then, conceded and admitting. As if this is something that we're all shy about saying, it's something that's wrong to talk about. Does that chime with you, Helen?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Is that something almost that the media can take on board? So, well, actually, in the way the way it's reported can have a big impact on changing perceptions.
Well, the media hold a lot of cards in every walk of life, don't they? But yeah, I'm fascinated by language. Actually, the language that we use. It can play such a big part and it can change your perception around everything. So language for me is key, and how we use that and how we make it a positive thing rather than a negative thing.
Yeah, I think there's also a cultural perspective here. As you know, I worked and I trained and worked in the States, and I think they're a little bit, as a culture, a little bit more open about talking about concerns or going to see a psychotherapist, and everyone's got a counsellor, and they go and talk to them and about daily life, you know. Whereas here we generally have been a culture where we keep things in. That's been my experience anyway. So I think there's also that cultural perspective. So raising awareness, which has become, in the last few years, there's been more about mental health and people talking about it quite openly. And also the language around, people talk about sports psychology and immediately think performance. Well, actually, no. It's an umbrella for a number of different things that sit underneath it. And sports psychology, you can talk about athlete transitions, you can talk about injury management, you can talk about youth development, you can talk about performance enhancement, sure. And then the mental health aspects as well. So I think we need to think about it in terms of performance with well-being.
Would a change in what we're simply talking about, a change in the name, I think help athletes or anybody involved in sport and any walk of life, but help them to come forward and be more open? Does the very phrase mental health have a stigma attached to it? The word mental, does that have a stigma attached to it? Could we call it mind management? I don't know.
I think two things. One is choice of words is very important in a positive way, and also being conscious of lazy language as well. Like, my kids would, we all speak English in our house, but they have different phraseology to me, right? Oh, that was sick, Dad, right? But it's very easy to go, oh, wow, that was mental.
The playgrounds of the 80s, I don't know whether it still is, but that used to be a derogatory, teasing term.
I think language is very important, and I think I think there's a duty of care to the athletes have a duty of care to themselves as well, and so it shouldn't all be spoon-fed by whatever. Now, that's an education piece, right? And I have to, clearly I've been around for a bit, and I'm learning a lot by I've only been diagnosed clinically depressed twice, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I've come out of it more self-aware and better for the experience. My wife said to me, are you back to your old self again? And I say, you can't go back to that when you've been through this, because you are different. And in that self-awareness, I've looked for language that I can use that makes me feel comfortable about how I'm feeling during the day. Because, you know, man of the north, robust, big boys don't cry, all that malarkey, right? Well, it is right to cry, so that's fine, and I talk about that. But there's phrases I've just seen, even in the last couple of weeks, like mental health is like meteorological comparison, right? There's different weather during the day, so you can be up and you can be down during the day, that's fine. What you have to look at is the overall climate. And if the climate's wrong, then you need to address that. And that's something I'm working around because I think it's really powerful for me. And there was something else there, which was, you know, coming back to 4.5 years of vicarious trauma when I was doing the BAC job. There's a phrase I saw the other day that you can't pour from an empty cup. And so I was responsible for 30 days of the 12 million lost to mental health last year, right? But if I think back, I was inefficient, if I was honest with myself. I was kidding myself that I was functioning, but I was inefficient for God knows how long. And so that self-awareness and facilitating that self-awareness, I think, is hugely important, and across the organisation, not just the athletes.
I'll throw it out at this point and go back to the point I was making earlier. If anyone wants to contribute at this point to weigh in with perhaps what are the competing forces, the competing challenges when it comes to establishing good mental health practice within an organisation. Is there anybody who feels the urge to join in at this point? Yes, we've got a microphone in the middle. We're able to take one across. I think it's coming up from the back there, just in the middle of the row. Thank you. Let us know where you're from and your name. That would be great.
Hi, I'm Carol Williamson, and I work for the NSPCC, the Child Protection Sport Unit. I think I'm just interested to ask about the mental health and elite sport action plan. Because one of the challenges I see in that is trying to embed that support right through the talent pathway. So we're not just talking about the elite things that have come up. It's about young athletes when they start sport, having that conversation. So I think it's for Shamima really the question about how do we have that conversation about positive mental health right at the beginning when young people get involved in sport, so that when they go through elite programs, it's just part of that conversation. And to me, that's the challenge. So it'd be interesting just to talk about that action plan and how governing bodies and sports.
Well, I can't really speak to what all governing bodies are doing out there, but I can talk about what we at Brighton are doing. We certainly have support in at the junior level. Psychologists. I'm overseeing someone who comes in to deliver mindset workshops to our 10 to under 16s. I'm responsible for 16 and overs. And I think that is key. If we give youth the tools and build their awareness up at that age, then they're better able to identify and to manage themselves at an older age in elite environments, where the stresses will be different naturally at a higher competition level, but then they have that self-awareness to know that actually I'm going through something, I may need to go and speak to someone and talk about it. I'd also say talking, when you go back to talking and talking about things, there are differences between male and female. Our brain chemistry is different, so we'll find that women do tend to form relationships through communication and talking more, whereas with men it might be more physical signs that we have to really identify and look for. So there are certain differences there, but yes, definitely I think at the youth level we've got to start there.
Just picking up on that, we've noticed the possible start of a trend of players who are accessing support for our confidential counselling service, and the largest age group we saw, we referred to that service last year, were the 18 to 25-year-old group, whereas a couple of years previously to that it would have been the over 30s. It'd be really interesting for us to see if that continues, but it suggests that maybe as players are coming into the professional system, perhaps at work that's being done through schools, or just the generational differences that perhaps younger people are more open to talking about the issues they face. But that's really interesting for us to keep monitoring and looking at going forward.
Yeah, even in my private practice, actually, by the way, I get a lot of parents calling out to me, asking me to work with their youth athletes. And often they come to me and they don't say, I want them to be the best and perform at their best. They're actually more concerned about their well-being, and they want them to come and really get some tools to really manage themselves.
Yeah, I was part of the UK Sports Steering Group because of the mental health charter that's now been put in place. And there was just a few of us in a room discussing it, and it was fascinating. It was a difficult conversation because there's so much to consider. There's so many different sports with completely different coaches and management structures and educational backgrounds and ethnicities, and there's so many different things to consider. But one of the things that we did discuss was transition, and often when we talk about transition, it's transition out of the sport. There's quite a lot of interest in that at the moment, but actually transition into a sport is equally, if not more important, to make that transition out go even better. You know, young people coming now into professional sports is difficult. You go from being just, you know, enjoying your sport and doing it because you love it, to suddenly being in this environment where you're now having to train this many times a week and lifting weights and all this expectation and pressure that's put on you, all the you know, the monitoring that goes on now in sport. When I woke up in the morning, I didn't just wake up in the morning and go and have my breakfast. I had to put a heart rate monitor on my finger. I had to fill in an app, how much muscle soreness, how many hours sleep. You know, go downstairs, what am I having for breakfast? I don't just choose what I want. I have to choose the stuff that's going to be right for me. There's so much that you have to think about as an athlete, and it is 24/7. Because it's not, you don't just go home at 5 o'clock or whenever you do, and that's your job done. You have to think about everything that you do. So transitioning into that is a big thing.
In hockey, is that happening at a younger and younger age? Because I think we're seeing that in rugby through the academy, school setups. You can be identified as a potential professional rugby player. Perhaps at a younger, perhaps no, 13, 14 years. Rugby is difficult because you'll see that you can develop later, but football, it's well documented, it starts a lot earlier than that. Cricket as well, and that can start really early, and that can.
I'm not sure that's the right model though.
No, I'm not saying it, but that increases all of those different areas. And suddenly you talk about identity. Well, from still a child's identity is potentially, if they're in that kind of setup, they're also already being identified as a professional rugby player, cricketer, footballer, and so you talk about this having to, you know, this aspect of care, duty of care, having to start at a younger and younger age. Definitely the case, and that's for the governing bodies definitely to be.
So I was just going to say, it's funny because you know, after Rio and London, visited loads of schools and met loads of young hockey players, and you know, there are now young girls who say they want to be a hockey player, and you know, initially I was like, brilliant, you know, that's great. There is a visible pathway. They can see that is a potential career opportunity, you know, pathway. But then on the other side, I'm like, actually, is that a good thing?
Is that what I really
Is
want?
that,
You know,
and how early do you decide that you want to do that and be that? And it's,
I fell into being a professional rugby player. No one falls into it because I haven't been the right time, but it doesn't happen now.
We've just got a couple of minutes left. Shamima, I just wonder from your psychologist's point of view, say we're in a utopian world, funding is no object. We've discussed players sort of entering professional sport or being earmarked from an earlier and earlier age. We've talked about the differences in gender approach, perhaps. There's also age, ethnicity. What would be your blueprint for best practice, I suppose, for a sports body to put measures in place to evaluate and care for their athletes' mental health needs?
Let me answer it to you this way, Alison. When you walk into a number of sport organisations, you'll find that they always have a big coaching staff, and they have strength and conditioning coaches and physios. But where's the psychologist? And yet, performance, we know, there's three parts: mind, the body, physical shape, and your technique. So why not then think? I hear all the time, sorry, we don't have funding, sorry, we don't have funding, oh, there's limited funding, we can only give you a couple of hours. Well, why not? Take a look at that health fund, or that fund that you have for practitioners, and say, right, well, there's three parts to this, we have to find a way to divvy that up more evenly.
And do you think that reluctance is because it's not something that's tangible, that can be measured? You can't measure quite the success.
Yeah, I think there is that. Psychology is all about, but yet there is.
Well, this is, yeah.
Because there are questionnaires and there are psychometric tests that you can use at the start, which you said you went through a few of your own where you can see where you're at the beginning, and then you can take those tests at the end too, and those questionnaires at the end too, and you can see perhaps some of the changes you've made over a period of time. And everyone is different, right? So when clients come to me and they say, well, how many sessions will I need? I say, well, look, let's start with this many initially, but everyone is different. I've had some clients that only need maybe 6 sessions, and others that continue with me longer term because they need the support longer term. So it's not a one-size-fits-all.
That's probably where
That's absolutely right. When I needed the hook of, I had a psychotherapist and I asked that same question, like, you know, how long am I signed up for? And I got a similar sort of answer. But actually, as and when it begins to work, you find the answer in yourself.
Yes.
That because I was filling in this GAD questionnaire, this PHQ, and I eventually said to Bev, my psychotherapist, I don't think I need to do that anymore. And you know, we came to an agreement that I didn't need to see her on the same basis because I'd gone through the crisis and the reflection, and I see her now once a month on a relapse prevention basis.
Yeah. Final thoughts with
of course, I think it may be important for sport to recognise that where there is a potential duty of care, the fact of funding doesn't necessarily avoid that duty of care.
Yes.
And that's very, very important for that to be understood.
Yeah. Look, I know there's a lot more that we could go into, and we do have a coffee break, so that's quite timely. So if you do want to pick up conversations, you know, with these guys, they'll be sort of milling around for a little bit now as well. We will thank you for all of you for being here and your insights. You've provoked a lot of thoughts already, I know. We will be back at 11:25, ready to start again at 11:30 for our second session. But please join me then in thanking Richard and Helen and Shamima and Jeffrey and Ian. Thank you very much.